The doors were a faded gray, worn with age. The only traces of paint were an indeterminate cream stuck deep in crevices and around the hinges. A rusted ram's head door knocker hung from a single heavy nail at its center. Their mother fit a jagged key into the lock, turned it, and shoved hard with her shoulder. The door opened into a dim hallway. The only window was halfway up the stairs, and its stained glass panes gave the walls an eerie, reddish glow.
Hello, it's Chuck from Above the Basement, Boston Music and Conversation. The voice you just heard was from the Spiderwick Chronicles audiobook, read by none other than the great Mark Hamill. Illustrator and author Tony Diterlizzi got his start drawing for Dungeons & Dragons, but soon began world building through his books that include Jimmy Zangwow's Out of This World Moonpie Adventure, The Spider and Fly, and with writer Holly Black, The Spiderwick Chronicles, to name only a few of his wonderful books. Angela Diterlizzi has worked as a makeup artist in film and TV, including Saturday Night Live and MTV, and for musicians including the fellows from Dave Matthews Band, Duran, and Depeche Mode, and is the author of several award-winning children's books herself that include Say What, Some Bugs, and Baby Love. This was an especially fun conversation for me as I used to live above Tony and Angela in Brooklyn back when I used to be an actor. Anyways, it was great to catch up with these two very talented people. So here is our conversation with Tony and Angela Diterlizzi, recorded in their basement in Amherst, Massachusetts.
One of my first celebrity sightings in New York City
Was Johnny Depp?
was Johnny Depp.
Really?
He was filming Donnie Brasco.
Yeah.
And we were coming there to look for an apartment, and we walked outside of our hotel,
They're filming.
and they're like, oh, they're filming some movie. And then Johnny Depp came walking out, and I was like, New York City is magic.
It's true. He walked right up to her, shook her hand.
He walked right up, and I talked to him, and
You guys didn't need any Johnny Depp. You had a famous actor living above you in Brooklyn.
That's
that's right.
Did you know Chuck?
Famous actor / artistic model.
That was 94 probably, right?
We moved there in 95,
Yeah, and you guys were there when we moved there.
95, 96.
Park
It's
Slope
right
on
around that.
First Street.
Park Slope is successful now, really mostly because of us, right? Really, we were kind of the trailblazers,
pioneers.
and we really helped gentrify Park Slope. didn't
That's
we?
right.
We did it.
Is that a landline? What is that?
That is
We've
a
got all
landline.
kinds of antiques here in the Diterlizzi studio.
Is that like what in
Yes.
Amherst, Mass? Like they have actual phones?
That's what we have.
That's it. We have it. You know what it is? I think growing up in Florida, the hurricanes always knock out the electricity for weeks.
Yeah, so you need to have something.
So you need a landline. So we just, it's like ingrained. I'm like, landline.
Yeah.
And people would ask that
telephone.
question. It would feel a little loaded like that until we had that crazy snowstorm.
That's right.
And then friends were coming over using our phone.
We still have a landline.
I have a landline.
Although
Then
it's
why
not.
did you act so surprised?
Well, because I don't hear landlines with a real
real ring?
No one calls us.
Oh,
the
yeah.
phone never rings.
I
don't
never.
know why we have a landline.
I never answer my phone at home.
You never answer any phone.
That's true. But I specifically don't answer my landline.
He's always like, "Oh, it was in my car." He says that every
My
time. to me.
landline is never in my car.
The
It's
cell
always
phone,
in my
the
house.
cell phone. But we've gone full circle here because you guys met in Brooklyn.
We did.
And I'm sitting
We were
now
neighbors.
next to one of the 3 Chucks that were drawn.
Whenever
were
three
drawn.
jobs.
There were several.
That's right.
Tony and Angela, we're so happy to be here. Thank you for bringing us not only into your home, but into your basement studio.
So now we're below the well, we're not below the basement.
We
but
were
we're
above the basement when you entered.
Yeah.
And now we are in
Just
the basement.
in the basement.
This is actually probably our very first recording that we've done in a basement, other than the test run we did.
And we had a couple beers and we're like, what are we doing?
Well, we were just trying to figure out how to use this stuff.
Right.
And,
I mean, we should probably
Yeah.
explain, this isn't just, this is a walkout basement. There's lots of light here.
no,
There's
it's
lots
lovely.
of windows.
It's not like
not
we're
like
in
a-
I
you
can
know,
hardly
like
see you through the
Silence
cobwebs.
of
What
the
are you talking
Lambs.
about?
I had that book.
Dungeons and Dragons?
Dungeons and Dragons?
The Monster Manual. That was your main thing that what you were doing. You hadn't done any of the children's books yet.
When we first met? No.
When you
in
first
the
met,
90s. No,
you-
I was still...
You started with D&D.
You were doing Magic the Gathering cards, though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
When we lived in New York, I was definitely working on Magic the Gathering, and I had worked for Dungeons and Dragons for a couple years, I think, at that point.
Yeah.
As an
And-
illustrator.
As an illustrator, yes. And
you were at Mac.
I was at Matt Cosmetics. I was doing makeup.
See, it's all coming
Working
back.
behind the
it,
counter.
it's,
Slowly but
did
surely.
you see how it came back? It was like a jolt of lightning.
so excited you
I got to say it
remembered.
out loud quick before I forget. Otherwise, it's gone.
Yeah. And the early years of Magic the Gathering, which is now, that's also 20-something years old. And
Now, Dungeons and Dragons started in what year? the
70s.
And then you were hired as an illustrator for the company?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was started by two men, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, who were war gamers, which is, you know, if you've seen the movies where they're like, and the army will move here, and they would slide all the figures. So these guys figured out how to do a game like
Without
that.
having the pieces.
And moving the pieces, and my army of dwarves will flank you, and, you know, that kind of thing. And they use those voices, of course, when they play.
Yeah.
But then
Sound like 12-year-old kids.
yeah. And then it developed into the game that became a phenomenon in the early 80s, which I played, and is enjoying an incredible renaissance right now.
Yeah, it is.
It really
really,
is.
really huge.
Yeah.
My
It's like
theory,
the cassette tape.
the cassette tape's coming back?
Yeah, and
Wait,
Dungeons
what?
and Dragons. I'm serious. It's coming back.
I
The
knew
cassette tape.
vinyl has been on the...
Now
vinyl.
cassettes are. But anyway,
Cassettes.
What
I don't
about
mind
Casingles?
Oh, a Casingle. What a
Casingles.
waste of money that was.
Do you remember Casingle?
Was it like just one song?
It's one song.
Actually, you know what? I have
really?
probably still some cassette tapes that you gave me. You're just getting rid of them. You're like, here, you want these? I think there was Elton John and Billy Joel, and they're
sounds
all
about right.
That sounds right.
and they're all very elaborately. It's got your beautiful handwriting in there on the cassette.
Did he make
on
you
the
a
side of it.
mixtape?
No, it was just the tapes that he had
Just tapes.
that I still have probably in the attic,
Wow.
packed away with all my other.
Can I have them back?
Yes,
Apparently there was money now.
Resurgence.
Yeah, the big
Cassettes.
resurgence.
you
It's really
you
cool.
can. Well, it's got the Tony Diterlizzi signature writing on it. So
Wow.
it must be
Yeah,
worth
that's
something.
That's a font.
That's worth.
At least 15, 20 cents.
I don't think I actually ever played them. I just think I had them.
What?
Well, you know, I'm nothing against Billy Joel and Elton John. I just don't listen
Or you.
to them. or you. Well, I kept them, so it must mean something.
So back to D&D.
Yes, Dungeons and Dragons.
So I had some friends that played. I remember not really understanding it.
Okay.
I mean, I was never that bright of a
and
kid.
you referred to your friends in the past tense, which makes me think
They're all dead.
they're all,
Right. They got really into it. And you know what happens after that. What?
No, Ron, tell me what does happen after
Well, you
that.
saw the Tom Hanks movie, right?
yeah,
That
they're
he
in
did?
tunnels killing each other. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Yeah.
That actually
That's right.
did some
Monsters and Mazes?
Monsters and Mazes or
Remember
Mazes
the
and
one that's
Monsters?
supposed to like
But
it's
did
supposed to be anti D&D because
Yes,
it can
because
make
people
kids
killed their
crazy.
parents and
Yeah.
And he
were
went crazy in the
Yeah.
was it made for TV?
That was based on
Pictures.
a sensationalized case about one guy
Yeah.
they thought had committed suicide, but it turned out he'd gone home.
Huh.
But so when they were looking through his dorm and stuff, they find Dungeons and Dragons. So the detective suspects, he's very into this devil game, and that's the media. Then it feeds a narrative.
I
that starts-
remember that narrative. I totally remember that.
Is
Yeah.
that what the D&D staff told you to say?
That's what it's telling me to say right now. Hold on, I don't know what I'm going to say next, so let me roll this dice, and it will determine exactly what I'm going to say next.
Did you have a certain
done.
character, something that you brought to that community? You basically were an illustrator, but did you have a certain character that was yours?
So it has like subworlds. So if you think of like the Marvel universe has Hulk and it has Iron Man and the
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic Four, and then they'll do like, okay, we're going to go out and do a space story. So Dungeons and Dragons kind of operates the same way. Dungeons and Dragons is kind of the entire universe, and then there's all these little subcultures. So I worked on a game line called Planescape, which was basically all the mythologies of Dungeons and Dragons in one world, and I did all the artwork. I was the sole illustrator for that for almost 10 years. They created new characters that you could play and new monsters, and I illustrated a lot of them.
And you did the monster manual too.
Yeah,
That
I did the first color monster manual actually.
But how does that work? They have an idea of Animal X or Monster X or whatever, and they send you an idea on just a text?
It could either be a text description and
Not an actual text. That was a long time ago.
no,
But-
it would have
but
been
they
a
give you a
fax.
right.
We're gonna say,
And that comes out.
you're gonna get this. It's gonna be in like 10, 15 minutes. You'll be able to read this. It's unbelievable. As it's coming out of the thing.
I know
Right,
those
dot
voices. I know
matrix.
those sounds.
So
Yeah.
it comes out, you read it, and then your imagination starts to
Go.
fire.
Yeah, that's it.
evil dog-like creature with hideous fangs.
And that's
And
why
horns.
he'd call me downstairs to model for it.
That's,
That's
where the three
right.
trucks came.
3 chucks.
Yeah,
No,
so
Chuck
and that
goes for a
evil,
magic card.
hideous monster will you'll do certain iterations of it, and then send it back,
You
and
would go back and forth through the art director to the game designers to make sure it met whatever they envisioned for this thing, and then off I went.
I think I remember seeing you outside
Crying.
painting, or maybe you were finishing up the final.
Oh, I would
Big
spray the
piece.
clear coat over
Yeah,
the paintings when they were done.
clear
Yeah,
coat.
because that would have killed all of us if I sprayed it in the apartment. I'd spray a clear protective coat out over the art before I'd ship it off to Wisconsin. They were based out of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin for years. But in the later 90s, they ran into financial troubles, and then they were purchased by Wizards of the Coast, who created Magic the Gathering, and now we're sitting on a Scrooge McDuck pile of money.
Wow.
and then they were later all
It was a good idea at the time.
absorbed by Hasbro.
It's still a very popular game, D&D, right?
It's huge. It's bigger than ever, actually.
And it's amazing with video games and virtual reality now. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they come out with a D&D virtual reality kind of thing.
I have a couple theories. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons also informs actually a lot of games, including video games that we play. So the structure of like your health meter and your armor and the level of your armor, all those rules are figured out during the 70s with Dungeons and Dragons and are later applied to all forms of gaming, including video games. But I think the reason it's probably enjoying a renaissance now is twofold. I think we're starting to understand that devices are not necessarily always good. So I think there's been a real push to like, let's put the phones down, let's sit around the table and actually, instead of having headphones on and playing a video game with someone across the world, let's actually just sit around and order a pizza or
and engage with each other.
As a family or as friends, and let's...
Isn't it amazing that it's become novel?
Yeah.
So we talk about this with music and how getting people together in one room to hear a band, there's something about this generation now that it's special because we're all sitting on our couches with our iPhones.
Yeah.
But when you get together with actual humans, it reminds me a lot of what you're talking about, the games, because there's nothing like imagination and experience without the devices and the technology doing it for you.
Yes.
Part of that comes from having kids too that are going
That
through
would
all
be,
of
was the
this.
other
that would
part
be
of
my
it,
other
right?
reason. I think the tweens and teens who were playing it in the 80s now have teens and tweens. So, they're like, hey, this is a really fun game.
Everybody like you who's like, I had that when I was a kid. Is
And
now
it was
playing
fun,
with
and I
their
loved
kids.
playing it. And
No, I was never good at it. I never quite understood.
But the acting and the role playing, I mean, that's really...
that didn't come until later on in my life, though.
You should play now.
Yeah.
We still
They have
play.
groups.
We still play. I mean, for the uninitiated, really the gist of the game is you make a character with some number statistics that you're going to be rolling to determine whether you do a thing. You have a dungeon master who's essentially the narrator of a story, and then, you're in a room and the door creaks open. A pair of red eyes are behind it and you see a sword. What do you do? And then whatever you think to do, you do. And that's what makes the game so fun because
I'm having such flashback. I remember hearing my friends talk about it like that.
And
Now,
it
go ahead.
informs everything I do later in my career. When I think back now, is I erroneously thought I'm going to draw wizards and monsters and get paid for it. That'll be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it wasn't just the characters and the monsters. It was the architecture. It was the armor. It was the weapons. It was how their belief system in the game affected the things that they wore, the things that they did. So
Building the world around
It
it.
was world building.
Wow.
James.
Did you guys
Wow, you
practice
guys are
that? That was pretty good.
Did that?
Wow.
And Angela, when you think about creating a world when you read something, when we use technology with virtual reality and with the iPad and whatnot, it all does it for us, as we were talking about before. But there's nothing like an actual book. As a writer, you must have that sense behind the process, that people are envisioning a world.
Well, I have that sense because I live with someone who envisions that world. I can write something in a story, but then for Tony to actually be able to draw something and draw the details of what all the characters look like, what they wear, what the architecture looks like, the inhabitants in that world, that's what I'm used to seeing. So when I write stories, because I'm used to someone who's also a visual storyteller, I tend to just picture it like a movie in my head when I'm writing. For me, I'm not an illustrator, so I write, but when I'm writing, I often think about what I hope the illustrations will look like. And for that reason, I've often gone out and got the illustrators or found new illustrators to work with on a lot of my books because I'm like, oh, I picture this looking like, a 1950s little golden book, feeling vintage, what I want the characters to look like. I often say, I speak fluent artist because I'm just used to being with one all the time.
She has that unique perspective, I think, in supporting me for so many years. She understands the way most illustrators work. But she's much more on top of what's going on in illustration more than I am. I'm kind of tend to be in my head a lot. She can hold her own with any art director of up-and-coming illustrators and artists and books and titles.
When you're looking at starting a book, it kind of reminds me of, Ron, I don't know if you know this, I used to be an actor.
It's amazing what you learn about someone every day.
I know. One of the things you do when you're preparing a character is that you build a bio of that character.
Right.
So you have to create a world. You create the world and then you kind of forget about it.
So you're making a backstory?
You make the backstory. I don't know if it's something that's tangible to people who are watching you, but it creates the life of the actor on stage. I must imagine that it's kind of the same for the book. There's a lot of backstories, a lot of imagination that goes into what's happened to these characters coming in, building the world, what they're wearing, what they're eating, all that kind of stuff. When it's finally down on the page, you're not seeing what they're eating, you're not seeing all these little things you've thought about, but it fills up that character into a tangible entity that would be less so if you didn't build up that backstory. Am I thinking too deeply about this?
No, not at all. I think then the challenge then is, what do you keep? Because what's important to the story, what propels the narrative forward in the story, and what do you unfortunately shave away? That's always the challenge when writing for younger readers, certainly with like a picture book, which I'm not very good at. She's much better at paring it down to the 300 words that the average picture book is.
Hello everyone, Above the Basement is excited for an upcoming episode with Old Crow Medicine Show. We are recording on Friday, June 15th before the band performs at Neshoba Brook School in Concord, Massachusetts. This is an intimate performance and is a part of the Umbrella Concert Series brought to you by the Umbrella Community Arts Center. The Umbrella Community Arts Center enriches lives and builds a vibrant community through the arts. They inspire creativity, learning, and personal growth through arts education programs, performing and visual arts presentations, and community collaborations. To get tickets for the show and to learn more about the Umbrella, please visit theumbrellaarts.org. Okay, now back to the conversation.
I remember hearing or reading something about you, Tony, with the Star Wars gig you did. Thinking about the line, "I'm your father." How do you create a line out of a picture? How do you create a picture out of a line, Angela?
Just blew my mind.
So in other words, when you're writing, you have a different perspective of what that picture is going to be with some salient lines of your text. And I wonder if that comes to mind.
Okay, so I've written, and it's coming out this fall, a book about glitter. Because in
Glitter, the stuff.
Glitter, the actual glitter. Physical, shiny, flecks, shards.
Right.
Because in a former life, I was a makeup artist. For me, I start thinking about vocabulary that evokes imagery of something like glitter, if I'm writing about glitter. Or if I'm writing a book about cowgirls, or if I'm writing a book about insects or animals. I mean, I start utilizing that vocabulary, and that's where I begin, or there's a spark of an idea. I tend to write younger picture books. I write in rhyme a lot. For me, it's more like songwriting, I think, than just straight storytelling like Tony does. I didn't grow up a huge reader. I grew up in a house that didn't have a lot of books, but I had a lot of music. So when I would listen to Jolene by Dolly Parton, I heard stories in her lyrics, and I saw the imagery that was evoked in those stories.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, more comparable to what I do as a writer, as opposed to being a storyteller.
So these books are like your albums.
Oh, yeah, or songs. I mean, they're songs. I
Depends
think of
on
them like
right.
songs. I mean,
Right.
they're poems. You know,
Right.
songs are poems. My stories tend to be like poems, and I hear them often like music, and I see them with imagery.
I could take the music comparison one step further when you spoke about the illustration. So a really well-executed picture book, there's a symbiotic relationship. They kind of need each other. The words won't quite fully carry the story on their own, and the illustrations may not completely make sense without the words. And I often think of it as lyrics and melody, that they really need each other.
Yes.
So you look at the lyrics to your favorite song, Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan, or a great Rolling Stones song, or what have you, Billy Joel. But if you just read the lyrics and have no concept of the music that goes with it, you're like, oh, that's okay, that's nice. Oh, he's writing about an Italian restaurant. Oh, that's very nice. But then when you hear the music and it takes it to the next level, that's why I feel like what the art can do.
It's so great that you mentioned that, because I really see music and lyrics a lot like spoken word or written word along with illustration, and what we're seeing all around us in this amazing studio. What I was thinking about in your career was what it must have been like to be an illustrator, i.e. that's Elton John, that's music only.
Right.
And then Bernie Taupin comes in with lyrics. So how was it to become both, where you became the musician and the lyricist at the same time?
I think I'm probably more like the musician who would noodle. When I've seen some musicians, or you get the demos, and they're on their guitar and they're kind of humming and they're going, that's kind of how I am, where I'll draw and I'll see little flashes of the story, and so I'll make all these little notes kind of around the drawing, and then maybe I'll stop drawing for a moment, and then I'll write more, and then I go back to drawing again.
Interesting.
So
that
it's
kind of
like
makes sense. It's not like your stuff is so abstract. It's going to have a lyrical quality. It's going to have words that come to mind when you see a person or an object or a monster or something.
Right. And even the longer format stuff, I tell you this all the time, I'm always thinking of it structured almost like a song where there's reprises and there's choruses in the story itself. Even if it's a long narrative where like, okay, we're going to loop back to this moment from the beginning, but now the protagonist is in a different place, so they're going to see it differently. Or, which maybe in a song, I'm going to sing this first stanza, but I'm going to sing it in a different key now, right? Like it's a little different. And if it's an old 70s, like Jolene singer-songwriter type song, now when I sing the chorus, it's through a different lens because now we've heard all the lyrics, and so it deepens as it goes along. And I'm fascinated by that storytelling structure because life is like that often.
Do you listen to music while
Absolutely.
you draw and while you write?
I mean, we always have music playing here. Like
Yes.
if we're working down here in the studio, we usually always have music playing. If I'm writing, I usually can't listen to music, or I can listen to soundtracks or, just something instrumental, but it's difficult for me to be hearing lyrics and then be writing them essentially.
Same for me. But when I'm doing my art, creating art, I listen to tons of music and stuff. So what happens with a book is these things can take almost a year. The one I just finished took me almost 2 years. And so there are days when you come down and you're like, I don't really want to do this today. Like I really want to go do something else. So or you're like, I'm into it, but I can't get into the mindset. So I often make playlists of music that will put me right into the
You make a mixtape, basically.
Yeah, make a mixtape.
Joe has astutely seen the fantastic pinball machine over there.
The thing of beauty.
When you live and work in the same place, you need some distractions.
Tell me
every
about
once
it.
in a
I do
while.
the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't.
You got to
have
go
an
blow off
office,
some
so-
steam. You got to
Yeah.
go, play some Pac-Man or some Galaga or some Captain Fantastic.
You have Galaga?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like 32 games loaded onto that
On
machine.
that Pac-Man machine.
Yeah.
Not just Pac-Man.
Oh, no.
No.
There's Dig Dug, Tapper,
Donkey Kong.
You have actual
Donkey Kong Jr.,
Yeah, you can play some
Ms.
Donkey Kong.
Pac-Man.
I bought.
Gotta go.
I
Rounds
bought
out.
my daughter's the Atari. You can buy the Atari now. It's
Oh.
all you don't need the cassettes anymore. You just have it's all in the computer chip. And I'm like, oh, come on, we're going to play Pong. We're going to play, Asteroids. It's going to be awesome. And I started playing. I'm like, this kind of sucks. This is really kind of boring. Boink, 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 boink.
Yeah,
I'm like,
Pong's
my
a
daughter's
different
like,
animal.
what? Are
Pong
you
was
kidding me?
always boring.
I mean, I used to love Tank.
Yeah.
I mean, I was,
I mean, you were like 7.
You're going too fast. Slow it down a little bit.
That's Tank.
I don't know. And I was so disappointed. We used it once, and I was like, and then we're done.
And you're in 15 minutes. You're like, wow.
Luckily, it was only $40, but
You've taken it out of context, though. I mean, back then you were like, it's never going to get any better than this.
The graphics on this are amazing.
But Galaga holds up. Like Galaga, Pac-Man,
Freaking
those
love.
classics.
Centipede? You got Centipede?
Kids
Yeah,
still,
on there.
Centipede's on there. Kids love
They still
Donkey
love
Kong. Still holds up.
Hey, what was the one where the guy would swing on the vine going across?
That's Pitfall on the
Pitfall.
Atari. Yeah.
Oh, that
Yeah,
was
that was a great
amazing.
game.
one.
Have you ever been hired to do a video game illustration?
I've been asked to work on
Right.
films and stuff, and generally I don't. It's like it's my real commodity is my imagination, my brain. So lending it to someone else's vision isn't usually.
You've been called for things like video games.
One of your classic works, of course, is Spiderwick Chronicles,
Yep.
where it became a movie in 2008, right?
That's right.
That transformation of those characters into this big screen, like the first time you sat there and saw it on the big screen, what was that like?
We were fortunate in that we were fairly involved in the process. So I actually got to see dailies and watch them
Walk
shoot.
on the set.
Oh, sure, yeah.
and see
Yeah.
them see a rough cut of the film before it was released.
That first
Sure.
moment of walking onto the set
Is
of
surreal.
something that really was just born in your imagination, and now there's hundreds of people working on it and creating it in 3 dimension
Life-size
Yes.
versions
Yeah.
of what you drew on the page.
was mind blowing.
Mind blowing. It was a strange feeling. At once I felt at home, but also a bit out of place too, because I don't work on movies, but all the things seem so familiar, and I could articulate with anyone in the crew about whatever they were working on.
Did the actors pick your brain?
Mimi.
It's our,
dog.
it's
The
our
dog.
first dog.
No, the actors didn't pick our brains, but the director, Mark Waters, was constantly, we talked fairly regularly while Mark worked on it.
Jim Bissell, the production designer, we were really close with him.
Yep.
We're still
Still
close with him.
friends with him. There was a couple producers on early who helped get the movie going, and we were very involved. And then Kathleen Kennedy actually came on and did the production of the film, who later would go on to helm Lucasfilm in these new Star Wars movies.
And all of Steven Spielberg's team, because she, produced all of Steven Spielberg's movies. So you're dealing with his cinematographer and
Caleb
an
Dashnell
editor
shot it, and his editor, and it was crazy.
So
What a
it
trip.
really was just like walking into a dream now.
Yeah, I'm
Was
gonna just sit back and let you guys do what you do. I'm not going to tell you.
But
how
was
to
there a
do your
fear
job.
that they would kill the initial thought of what the story was, or like they would do something and they wouldn't listen to you? Maybe.
Sure.
I would imagine that must have been.
That's always a concern, and I think you probably talk to any person who's created the source material for a film.
Yeah.
That's the concern. Having watched enough books turn film, you're making something completely different out of it. You're making it do something different. So you know it's got to change. You know it can't be.
You have that expectation.
Yeah, so I think
it.
what you say is kind of what you said, Chuck. I just kind of would remind them, like, remember the spirit of the book, the reason you optioned it in the first place. I think that's the best you can kind of hope for, and hope that they get it right. So many moving parts and so many people, and they all have different agendas, and
I remember often saying, like, let's just assume it's going to suck.
Yes.
And then it will either meet or exceed our expectations.
That's
Have
it.
low expectations.
And that was it.
We've talked to some musicians who have written for kids. We've talked to a guy named Alistair Mook, he wrote an album for kids with cancer.
Okay.
And it's talk about losing your hair, and it's very kind of, it's a fun and
Deep
and
fun.
It's supportive, and it's a really great album, and he actually does a lot of kids shows and stuff like that, but he also does grown-up regular singer-songwriter stuff that he does as well. And they're all fantastic. You kind of run the gamut with some bugs, and then you have Jimmy Zangwow, and then you've gotten a little bit moving upwards with what's the one with the rabbit?
Kenny and the Dragon.
Kenny and the Dragon, and now you're up and doing the Star Wars stuff.
Yep.
Is there a mindset that you put yourself in? Do you even think about it when you're writing for a demographic, or is it just you're just trying to write a good story?
Well, I feel like often we're giant kids. We already are in that mentality. You're in
I knew
this
that.
space.
I knew that.
Yeah.
I remember
You're
you
in
guys.
a studio that is covered in toys, literally from floor to ceiling. And often listening to music that we grew up with when we were kids, we have to tap into that. But we also have, a young daughter, so that also surrounds us in her modern landscape. For me, it's just about what's inspiring me. That's what I'm going to write about. If I'm talking to Sophia when she was 4 and she comes home and she's crying because her friend said bugs were disgusting, and I'm like, what did you say? And she said, well, I said bugs are cool. And I said, well, some people think bugs are disgusting because some bugs sting and some bugs bite. And she said, and some bugs stink and some bugs fight. And I was like, thank you for that first stanza. And I just came home and started writing.
And
so
now
it all
she's suing
begins with a creative spark. And
Right.
Our inspiration's always changing. You have a Christmas book coming out called The Broken Ornament.
Oh, that's right, The
coming
Broken
out.
Ornament.
And that was inspired by a real life situation.
Incident. Yeah, where we were decorating the tree a few years ago. Angela had bought some glass ball ornaments, and Soph, our daughter, was lacing the hooks and kind of handing them to us. And we had the music playing, and the hot chocolate was coming. And I love decorating the tree. It's one of my favorite things from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And you're not looking, and you hear that, and you look, and she's got her shoulders hunched in the, I'm so sorry. And I was immediately transported back to being like her age and dropping an ornament in my
delicate,
day. Hey, come on, those things cost money. Pay attention. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you feel bad. I normally can't do this. You're much better at it than me. I just make up a story right there. And I just literally knelt down and said, it's okay, when you break an ornament on accident, a Christmas fairy is born. And she smiled, and I was like, gave her a hug, and we're done. And Angela goes, that's your next book. And I'm like, no, that's just
She's
not
like, I
being
want 25 fairies.
Yeah, exactly.
On accident. That was the caveat.
Okay,
I didn't know
sorry,
it was
sorry.
broken on
The
accident.
tree fell over by accident. Yeah.
That's right.
When Sophie was a kid and I would tuck her into bed, she'd go, Dad, tell me a story. And I go, oh, well, what book would you like me to read? Mike Mulligan or Curious? No. Tell me a story. You write stories, so tell me a story. And I'd be like, I can't. I'm not as spontaneous. If she asked her, she'd be like, well, Porcupine was driving in a car and he sees a skunk by the side of the road. Like, it just starts coming out. And I
And it
can't,
rhymes, too.
And I can't. Yeah, and it rhymes on top of that. I just can't do it. I'm much more cerebral. I think I've got to think about it more. So that is a very rare thing for me to be able to just almost not think and do it on autopilot. And then it took me 2 years to figure out what the rest of that story was. But I had the.
Well, that's your current project that's taken you a couple years. 2 Christmases.
2 Christmases. Yeah.
How was that when you came to the next Christmas? Did you reboot some of the story, or was it just another day, another week?
An interesting thing happens in the wake of success, to be honest with you. So the Tony that you would have known, Chuck, who was trying to get into children's books, was, 20 going on 30 something. And I was trying to get those books done. The advance of royalties is not very big. So you're really like, you're working. You're like, I got to get this book done. I got to get it off to the publisher. Okay, I'll take a little bit of a break. Okay, I'm on to the next book. But once you achieve success and financial success, what then changes within me is this isn't good enough. I actually think I need to redo it. So this book in particular, I wrote the book. I spent a better part of a year writing it and doing all the sketches and doing what we call a book dummy, which is basically like a demo, if you will, of what the book is going to be. So here we have the page turns and everything. And I got to the end of it and I read it to Sophia and she's like, it's good. And I was like, what? It's just good? And I was like, I knew something was fundamentally not right. And Angela and I kind of tore into it. We had been in Florida and I had lunch with my friend Mo Willems, and Mo took a look at it and he knew exactly what was wrong with it. And so I knew I had to do it.
He said, you wrote the perfect midlife crisis book.
That's right. Where the kid wasn't the protagonist, the parents were.
Well, I mean, you talk about working and being inspired by being a kid. That's important to not be constantly working from a place of nostalgia, because you're like, oh, you're an almost 50-year-old guy that's writing about being a kid when you were 8. But you have to remember what it is to be that kid. When the first draft of that book, it was the parents' story.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Why don't you do 2 books, though, and one you give to the parents?
Yeah.
That's
No,
really
if you're
interesting.
lucky, if you're fortunate, you get it to work on both levels.
But that's the reality, is that it took your experience to even create the idea and the character. That's the nidus of that character to begin with.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the irony there. It has to come from the kid's perspective, but you couldn't create that if you didn't have the dad's perspective.
It really is like a journey, and there's always a story behind the story of how you get from the beginning to the end.
You know, I love how you how you did the sound effect of the ornament breaking. It's something we can recognize an ornament falling and breaking. You know what that sound is.
I never
like.
had that sound.
Even though,
Jewish.
well,
I had a menorah fall.
But don't you have? I thought you don't have a Christmas tree too.
I do now in my 40s.
In your 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
But
my
it's-
wife is Catholic.
But it's certainly you don't even have to tell me what it is. When you went, I'm like, I know exactly what
You
you're
know that.
talking about.
Yeah.
It reminded me of, remember The World According to Garp?
Sure.
So he sees the woman, they get out of the cab and she drops a glove, right? And he wrote the short story. It kind of triggered something to write that story about the magic glove. She can wear the gloves and she can heal people with the glove, but if she takes the gloves off, she doesn't feel anything. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I like.
Why are you putting gloves on?
I like. I
you a
like.
germaphobe?
Gloves like that ornament, though, like you can visualize what it's like.
Well,
It
it's just a
tells the
trigger.
story from the trigger.
Well,
Yeah,
and that's
right.
what
Trigger.
happened. Like, so
Right.
he had posted a photo on Instagram of the broken ornament and mentioned, like, in a moment of kind parenting, this is what I said to our daughter. And then we woke up the next morning and there was like thousands of likes, and people started saying, my son broke my grandmother's ornament. There's something that really could resonate here.
When you made that sound, I know exactly what that sound is and everything that it entails. A really expensive ornament just hit the ground. You know, is this something that my grandmother gave us? It is, you know, and my daughter's now going to be sad because there's a whole bunch of things that happen that flood at you.
I collect 1950s Japanese salt and pepper shakers.
So do I.
So does Chuck.
Yeah.
Usually with anthropomorphic characters. There's a whole cabinet of them above the basement, upstairs. And
like that, Chuck?
so there's
You
this
see that?
little.
See, I
this-
just slipped
well
that
done.
in.
You like
Well done.
that?
.com.
That's for
Really
you.
good.
.com.
Above the basement.com.
.com.
So I have this little egg timer, and it's a little mouse, and I used to play with it. It was my grandparents, and I used to spend a lot of time with them. And when my grandmother passed away, my grandfather gave it to me. And I had to think about, okay, if it's not an ornament, what would it be like to be Sophia? What if she broke that? What if our daughter broke that, and how would she feel? Thinking that it's just one of the other things in the cabinet, but also it means so much to me.
The broken ornament, though, is very metaphorical for a family. I mean, you're going to have a broken ornament every once in a while.
That's correct. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it's very powerful to me, even as someone who didn't grow up with it. I live in the world of Christmas trees, and now my family might...
You live in a world of Christmas trees?
might,
Wow.
every,
is this
every,
world?
every most American Jews grow up that way, and it's very special. And actually, for me, it was really awesome to marry into a family that had that as such a solid tradition. It was really special to have as an adult.
Well, and we had to ask ourselves, like, what does Christmas mean?
Yeah.
And so this kid in this book he's like, it means having more of things. Because when you're a kid and you like something, you really just want more of it.
Right.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, we need a bigger tree so that Santa has more space to leave more presents.
Right.
And so what happens when you break one thing? Oh, you can get more of that, but you can't.
So going way back to kind of what you were initially asking, like, what are you tapping? What are you doing? I'm trying to impress the 9-year-old or the 10-year-old or the 12-year-old version of me. And I'm also trying to impress my daughter.
It's funny because we worked on the cover for this book a lot. There was a lot of revisions
Back
for
and
the
forth,
cover.
yeah.
Soph had made a card for you. It's on the fridge right now, and it says, I think the new cover looks amazing. And it was like, oh, it doesn't just look good anymore. It looks amazing. She's impressed.
I got from good. Got from
Yeah.
the shoulder shrug, and it's all right.
When is it coming out?
September.
September 2018.
Yes.
What's your next thing?
Just add glitter.
Just a glitter, right.
That's October 9th.
What's the bullet of your book?
The
concept?
question is there such thing as too much bling? Depends on just how much you bring.
Ah.
So we'll see.
See? With the rhyme
at
right
this.
there.
I know. I can't. Yeah.
With the rhyming and the
Not
talking.
me.
And
No,
the,
I can't do that.
And the illustrators who?
Her name's Samantha Cotterell. The illustrations are super cool. It's actually all in 3D and it's photographed. So she cut out scenes and characters
neat.
and used real glitter. So it's 3-dimensional sets, essentially.
Ah, real glitter.
And then it was photographed. The publisher, Simon & Schuster, was super excited, and they're springing for real glitter ink. So all the pages are going to have glitter inside.
Oh,
too.
sweet. Parents will love you when the glitter gets all over their couches.
Yeah.
I know. It is the herpes of crafting.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, Chuck, you have a little on your cheek.
The herpes, the herpes of crafting. I
Yeah.
like that a lot. One of the last times I was in Northampton, the
Okay.
bookstore there had a Tony Diterlizzi children's book display in the bookstore.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you don't remember it? It was a special art
Display?
of all these different children's books, and
Okay.
yours was part of it.
Oh,
You're
that's
thinking
you're thinking
of
of the Michelson
you're
Gallery.
thinking of the
or
Michelson Gallery.
Michelson
Yes.
Gallery. So
Yes.
it wasn't a bookstore, it was a gallery.
That's a
Gallery
gallery.
and a
Yeah.
bookstore. I mean, they do sell books, but
Okay.
it's primarily an art gallery.
We work closely with the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Arts. I mean, there's already a very robust group of children's book writers and illustrators in the area, but then people are always coming here to events. And
I'm
things like
sure it's kind of a mecca for that.
Last year, we went and visited the Norman Rockwell Museum.
that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just missed you getting in there and having your exhibit there. Is it still
Yeah.
there?
It's there till the end of May. Yeah.
Really? The
May
end of May?
27th.
Yeah.
What's hanging up in there? Is it Jimmy Zangwow or what's in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, Chuck, because that
It's a great museum.
It is a great museum. I mean, we've been going there for years ourselves, and I mean, Norman Rockwell is a huge influence. I mean, I grew up on it, probably like so many people. The museum what they've been kind of dealing with is that generation that grew up on Rockwell is kind of aging out. And so they've been looking at ways to bring in younger people to the museum. And so
How's it feel to be young?
I know. Yeah.
And so they reach out to you?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think they want the art. It's not
true, though.
me. It's the people I'm reaching, I think, is what they're
Yeah.
looking.
Well,
Especially
and
if
a
there's
lot of museums are doing this. They're trying to reach families.
Yeah, but
Yes.
you're in the success. I would venture to say that in your success now, this is a moment of time where you can be looked at as a
old person.
younger Rockwell, or like
I think
you
they
know?
refer to it as a mid-career retrospective.
That sounds good.
I'll go with that.
Mid-career.
Mid-career.
It's very optimistic. That
Yes,
You
it
know,
is.
It's not the end
Well,
of
he's
career.
been making art for 25 years.
Yeah,
I mean, as a paid illustrator
Yeah.
and author now.
Yeah.
So hopefully, mid-career, maybe another.
Hopefully.
I do want to ask about Duran.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
the reflex.
So that
It's
the
a
reflex.
it's a lonely child or an only child. The lyrics on that one were really weird.
You did makeup for them, right?
I did a lot of bands.
You did makeup for a lot of bands. And yeah, never mind. Yeah. All those things.
Excellent.
Yes.
That's great.
I did makeup for a lot of bands
Yeah, I
when
saw
we lived
that.
in New York.
Yeah.
And Duran being one of them.
And Bill Clinton, who plays the saxophone.
Yes,
Yeah?
I did makeup for
Yeah.
Bill Clinton as
on
well.
now.
The thing that I loved about makeup, I wasn't one of these people who was like, I love all the textures and the new colors. And I loved the interaction. I was a kid that grew up watching Saturday Night Live, seeing like smart, funny, amazing women and thinking like, I want to work on that show.
Yeah.
You did theater as an adult, but I grew up doing a lot of theater. I loved performers. These people, I just thought they were so cool. They were artists. Nobody in my family was an artist. One of my early jobs was working at like a Clinique counter at the mall,
Yeah.
which is when I met Tony in Florida. It's like,
You're-
I want
You getting your colors done?
You want to go to
You ever
Chick-fil-A
went
for
to-
lunch or TGI Fridays? Oh, they got a Ruby Tuesday.
So you
I
gave her
worked at
three
that Ruby
choices.
Tuesdays. Actually, a friend in a band introduced
Yeah,
us.
friend in a band.
We had a guy in a band that we were both friends with. So he was like, you have to meet my friend Tony. He has just as sick a sense of humor as you do. So Tony's like, listen, I want to move to New York. I want to do kids' books. I was like, I've never been to New York. I want to do makeup for TV. Let's move. And we moved.
So she worked at the Today Show. I don't know if we made that clear, like for many years.
Saturday Night Live and the
to
Today
Saturday
Show.
Night Live, yeah. I remember one day you called me. You were on your way home, but you were like an hour late. and you're like, I just sat in the makeup room and talked to Carlos Santana for like an hour, and she was like, he was amazing.
He was amazing and just so kind and so wonderful, and like, he's just like lint rolling his hat while he's talking to me, and just, one of these moments that just burned in my mind.
And even when we met some of the folks who worked on the Spiderwick film, I mean, some of them, same thing. They're just very down to earth. You asked like, did they ask about like their character? Not so much, but some of them were just like Andrew McCarthy had kids, so he knew my books.
Of Pretty in Pink, Andrew McCarthy?
Yes.
Yeah, he played the father in the Spiderwick film.
Blaine?
He played the douchebag dad. Yeah.
The douchebag
He was
Blaine?
like, he was like Blaine grown up. I remember going to breakfast with the director, Mark Waters. They'd cast just about everybody at that point, but they hadn't cast the father. He said, "You're not going to believe who we have for the dad." And that's exactly what he said. It's Blaine grown up. Like, it's going to be perfect.
Can you imagine building your career on just being an asshole?
That's how you where you are. On that note, guys, it's such a pleasure seeing you again. It's not very often you get to be next to neighbors who... I mean, we weren't close, but we saw you guys all the time. We'd go over for the Oscars.
You introduced us to the first episode of South Park.
I did?
Yes, you sent us.
You brought it over on VHS tape.
You sent us that pilot that they had made.
The Jesus Santa fight.
Yes.
Yes.
So we have
that's
you
still
to thank.
Genius. Well, that's
it.
I'll put that on my resume now. That's
That's
awesome. But it's so great to see you guys again. Thanks for having us in your house.
Thanks
Really
so much.
appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Awesome.
You can see Tony's art, find out where it's being shown, and purchase his books at Diterlizzi.com. And learn more about Angela and her books at AngelaDiterlizzi.com. Go to AboveTheBasement.com where you can join us on Patreon, sign up for our newsletter, listen and subscribe to our podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and look at all the nice pictures we post on Instagram. We are everywhere. On behalf of Ronnie and myself, thanks for listening. Tell your friends, and remember, Boston music, like its history, is unique. How would you like to join us in creating great conversations that inspire and connect? Patreon is a membership platform that provides a way for creators like us to build relationships and provide exclusive experiences to subscribers or patrons. We've been self-financed since we got off the ground in June of 2016, but in order to continue to fully invest all we can in each episode, we need your patronage. For more information, please go to patreon.com/abovethebasement.